Record. And we're recording. Hey everybody, it's Sean Murphy with 1455, and I am delighted to continue the 1455 interview series. We're off and running into 2021, and the series is going strong. I finally have someone that I've wanted to talk to for ages. If you know anything about me, you know that I am not only a fan and am fortunate to be a friend of our next guest, but I consider her a legit hero to the industry. Her services that are available are indispensable, but I talk a lot about community and the notion of literary citizenship. And Jane Friedman epitomizes cultivating one's own path, but also really being invested in the community and lifting others up. I can't begin to describe how many people I have talked about that know her or have been inspired by her. So suffice it to say, this is a real honor for me. Let me read her bio, which I've truncated because you need to go to her website to get a handle on how many things she has her fingers in and all the amazing things she does. But the formal bio is Jane Friedman has over 20 years of experience in the publishing industry with expertise in business strategy for both authors and publishers. She's the editor of The Hot Sheet, the essential industry newsletter for authors. She's previously worked for F+W Media and the Virginia Quarterly Review. In 2019, Jane was awarded Publishing Commentator of the Year by Digital Book World. And her newest book, which I always recommend and cannot recommend more enthusiastically, The Business of Being a Writer, is available. And if you are trying to get into the business of being a writer, pick it up. It's an essential note on craft and business. Also in collaboration with the Authors Guild, she co-authored the Authors Guild Guide to Self-Publishing. In addition to being a columnist with Publishers Weekly and professor with the Great Courses, Jane maintains an award-winning blog for writers at janefriedman.com. I'll put all that information in the summary of this on our YouTube page, but definitely check her out online. Jane, thank you for being here, and it's always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you, Sean. It's great to be in conversation with you again.
Yay. Well, so as a fan of yours, as both a person and all the work you do, I mean, I'm always interested in what people are going to say, but just with somebody like you, I've been dying to hear what some of your answers to these questions are, because I would have no idea. I wouldn't even begin to guess. So let's start with the first one, which is, what's the first book that made you want to be a writer, or even just a book that changed your life?
If I go back to childhood, or at least adolescence, I think it was Anne of Green Gables that was very inspiring, and it was because of the character of Anne Shirley. It's not like I read the books and I was like struck dumb by the beauty of the writing, although they're written fine. Like there's nothing wrong with Lucy Maud Montgomery's writing, but it was the character, this very kind of literary, romantic, dreamy girl who always had her nose in a book. And of course, anyone who's read the series or even just watched, the TV adaptations, about how she wants to become a writer, and she eventually publishes some essays about her hometown, and she dedicates it to her sweetheart, Gilbert. And there's just so much in there that's delightful. I think that just really sparked my imagination, and also made me feel like this was something that would be okay to strive for. Like it was, you could be that literary person and be, desirable in some way.
Right on. And that's the first, believe it or not, that's the first time that particular title's come up, which now that it has, surprises me. So I'm glad that has made its way into the series. If you could say, and this is a tricky one for people of our ilk, but who is your most profound artistic influence, or just one of them?
My go-to is probably Alan de Botton. I mean, it's always it's hard to choose just one person, obviously.
Yep.
But he's the author I go back to again and again, and who has had the most long-term, broadest influence. So the first book of his that I read was On Love. That's a novel. I think it was his first book.
Okay.
But he writes primarily nonfiction. He's known for popular philosophy. So he wrote How Proust Can Change Your Life. That was like his breakout bestseller.
Yeah.
But he's continued to produce books over the years on all sorts of topics: architecture, travel, work, religion, the news. Like as a thinker, I just find him fascinating. He also did a book. It's not necessarily his book. It's out of his business called The School of Life, called How to Reform Capitalism, which really examines the tension between art and commerce, which, I really like that intersection. I find that tension fascinating. I think that art and business can work together. And so that book really exemplifies an optimism around art and business and making it work both on an individual level and on a broader community level. So his life, not just his work, but Alan de Botton's life kind of exemplifies the things that he writes about. So he started this School of Life in London, I don't know, maybe in 2010 or the early 2010s. And it started off with, I believe, weekly Sunday sermons that were free to the public. They were not religious in any way. It was like a secular sermon. And then it's become this huge business of trying to help people lead better lives. And I just find the whole enterprise it's so full of integrity. It's inspiring. It's multifaceted. You can take his classes or read the books or just watch the YouTube videos. He sells merchandise like prompt cards to help you have a better, not just better conversations, but have better relationships with the people in your life. So I could go on and on and on about his work and how much it's meant to me. So I have most of his books, and I still follow School of Life. And yeah, I should just stop there. I'll ramble.
No, that's great. First of all, amazing answer. Not surprising. It makes all the sense in the world to me that he would be a touchstone. And I would just add, how rare to have that combination. He's an indefatigable thinker and writer on all these different topics, but also is a good person, which I think is always worth celebrating, because I think we're in an era where we are rightly interrogating. You have to separate the art from the artist and all the complications there. But when you do encounter the rare, prolific artist who seems to be a genuine person of integrity, boy, is that refreshing.
Yeah. He's never done anything I can take issue with, which I probably have him on too high a pedestal. He would probably not like that. I find him a very humble person, which is why he's so impressive. I think.
Yeah. Right on. Okay. How about an album or movie or both that you can immediately recommend without reservation?
Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. I can't remember the year that came out, maybe 2007 or 8. But that's the Jim Carrey, Kate Winslet romantic sci-fi setup where you can have your memories of a relationship erased. Yeah. It was just so powerful the very first time I watched it. I don't know. I think my response was very probably personal, given what I was going through at the time, which was like the dissolution of a marriage. So like all of that, it was the right time and place for me to see that film. But I go back to it frequently, and I think it's one of the most brilliantly written scripts ever.
Endlessly rewatchable, and arguably Jim Carrey's finest moment as a thespian.
Yes, I think.
Right on. Love it. And that's the first time that one's come up, which is a little surprising too, but amazing. All right. This is a tricky one. And in fairness, if you'd been able to see these in advance, you would have been able to prepare. But so don't feel any pressure. But if you could pick the best first or last line of any book, doesn't have to be the best, but what comes to mind for you is like the epic opening or closing line?
Am I going to remember the line? Is it funny? I remember the book, but not the line.
Yeah, you don't have to reset the line either. That's too much pressure.
Hold on. Let me, since I'm online, I can Google this. Let me see if I can find it while you wait on me for a second.
No, it's okay. And I will say while you're looking, it's my fault. I always give the interviewee a heads up to read the questions if they choose to. We did not communicate effectively, which is on me. So Jane is doing this cold, which is like all the props in the world.
Okay, let's see. I was looking it up. Okay, so the novel is Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse.
Yes.
And but I'm looking it up on Amazon and they've cut off the first page. They're like starting me on like page 4. Oh wait, here we go. Yeah, I think I'm remembering the first line incorrectly. So I know there is a quote from it that I used in a personal essay, and I could
We'll put it in that. We'll put it in the write-up.
Hold on. If you get, I'm just trying to, let's see. I can look up the essay. It's saved here somewhere on my computer, and maybe we can have some fun patter while my computer finds it.
So
for
I will
me.
say, while you're looking, this I love this because this epitomizes when I talk to writers about this series. I share the questions because I jokingly, but not totally jokingly, say, for the average person, these are questions that you could just answer, but for writers and deep thinkers, these are the most important questions in the world that no one takes lightly. So it's not something that we can usually toss off trivially, and I think we reserve the right to change our mind from day to day.
Yes.
But these are critical, moments in a writer's life.
Okay, so I got the Hermann Hesse part right, but it was a different novel that I was thinking of. Actually, Demian was the novel.
Okay.
And there's a story behind this that I think will be entertaining, even if I've gotten the first line wrong. Why isn't it coming up? Okay, so full disclosure, I might have it might not be the first line,
okay.
But I wanted only to try to live in accord with the promptings which came from my true self. Why was that so very difficult? I think that's the first sentence of Demian. And the book was assigned to me in a high school literature class that was examining the shadow self, which is this Jungian idea that we all have, this dark side that is often repressed. It gets very Freudian, Carl Jung and Freud are known for these ideas. And he talks about how the book is kind of about how you integrate that dark side of yourself with the light. Like you need both in order to be a full person. So one of the reasons I was quoting that line in an essay I was writing, it was an essay called Drinking as Genuine Vocation, which was for a collection of essays called Drinking Diaries about women and drinking. So I was invited to contribute to this because I was one of the few people that had a positive thing to say about drinking rather than a horrible story, like parents who were alcoholics or maybe alcoholism in my own life. I've been fortunate not to experience those negative things. And so in the essay, I write about how drinking helped me find my true self. That's the point of the essay.
First of all, I can't believe I haven't read that, and I want to read that book. But I will be self-indulgent and say that if I'm not mistaken, our relationship was certainly solidified over bourbon and our shared enthusiasm. So yes. that was a seminal moment when we, I think, broke bread for the first time and shared our love of bourbon. So what a perfect response, serendipitously. Indeed. Thanks for hanging in there and finding that out. All right, how about an underrated author that you'd like to give a shout out to? Can be contemporary or classic.
It might, in fact, be Hermann Hesse, because I feel like no one talks about his work today. I mean, maybe they talked about it at some point in the past, but I mentioned just now Demian, there's Steppenwolf. He's known for Siddhartha. Yeah. He's got so many other books. He also wrote poetry, and I guess maybe he's overlooked because his works are seen as dealing with adolescence, early age, so kind of young adult issues, and maybe, at least until recently, sometimes such works just weren't taken all that seriously. So I feel like he's been overlooked for dealing with those issues that appeal to adolescence and those early existential angsty
Totally.
things.
You,
So yeah, I think
you know,
it's still,
my unfortunately cynical take is that I think in large part he was replaced by Ayn Rand. Like I feel like
oh,
in our generation, because you and I are contemporaries, and I know in college there were professors like he had not been kind of sidelined at that point. Like that was obligatory, whether it was high school or freshman, sophomore, something from him was going to be on the syllabus. And I concur that you don't really hear him. So I'm glad you're giving him and his work a shout out. I don't know if I'd recommend it to middle-aged people, although ironically, maybe they need it most if they're going through a spiritual crisis. But he is definitely the type of writer that you read at a certain age and is so comforting and meaningful. But yeah, I think maybe it's on the maybe things happen in the bursts, but I think Ayn Rand kind of became the capitalist hero, which we see the results of that.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
let's flush that. So perfect next question, and this is my obligatory, super self-indulgent, half joking. Why have you not read Moby Dick? Or if you have, is there a classic of literature that you've been meaning to get around to?
Oh goodness. So did I read Moby Dick? I definitely had it assigned to me for a class, but did I make it through? Probably not. It was one of those things I probably faked my way through the class discussions or read enough Cliff Notes to pass any essay exams. Um, Gosh, I could like go down a list of books I was told to read and faked my way through. That might be the best way to answer the question. Like Thomas Pynchon. I was assigned Gravity's Rainbow. I can't believe a professor assigned that novel. I mean, if you don't know what it looks like, it's like this thick.
Yep.
And I found it unreadable. But I think it's because I wasn't patient. I
Mhm.
just it's like I don't know. I'm not interested. Um, what are some other things that I've managed to step around? I haven't read Catcher in the Rye, but it's just one of those things where it just never, or no, not Catcher in the Rye. I have read Catcher in the Rye. I'm thinking it's oh,
Catch 22.
not Catch 22. It'll come to me later.
Okay.
Maybe.
Okay.
But yeah, there's got to be several dozen classics I have not read.
Well, and I think all again, it's like as we get older, right? That's kind of the both. To me, that's one of the conundrums of a creative life. As we age, there's more great stuff in the world, and we're still trying to catch up. I remember I started on kids on a piece of paper, a list in grad school of like books. I was like, I don't have time right now, but my world is broadening, and of course, that list has only continued to grow. So it's something to aspire to, but it's also like we're never going to catch up with all the stuff we want to do.
I haven't read To Kill a Mockingbird. Um, is there anything else? Well, there is, but like that might be the biggest I can think
Okay.
of.
Okay. There's always time. There's always time. All right. I know the answer to this, and anyone that knows you knows the answer. I still want you to expound a little bit because what you do is important. This is usually for people that write a lot of fiction. I think it's even more applicable and important for you, which is there a single theme or issue that your work tends to address? And I'm not implying that you have one, but I think I'm teeing it up. So your work, your trajectory of your work you are a specialist in several things, but you write very in illuminating fashion about the industry.
Right. So going back to the art and business issue, that's something that I keep revisiting in many different ways. How do authors earn money? What has the history of that been like? How do authors innovate, especially in the digital era? There's a lot of pessimism surrounding it right now about authors earning money because there's this idea that, not invalid, that big tech and the changes wrought by the internet have disadvantaged authors and how they earn money. But I think that's only true for a certain type of author who's been earning in a certain type of way. I think adaptation has to happen. Now, that's not to say that big tech companies or corporations or society doesn't need to improve and do better and be socially responsible. And yes, we need regulation, I think, of companies like Amazon, regulation that hasn't happened yet.
Right.
That said, I think that whether you're a journalist, a freelancer, a novelist, a poet, there are more options than ever uh, to make money, to reach your readers. I think for some, this is both a blessing and a curse, because at one time, maybe you could go off into your garret and write and come back and bestow your genius on the world. And you didn't have to dirty your hands or with the marketing. Your publisher would take care of that, and you could just continue to write in isolation. I think some of that's a bit of a myth, that any writer could just write in isolation and never market and promote. We know that Mark Twain marketed and promoted. We know that Charles Dickens marketed and promoted. So I think just about every successful author has done something to raise their profile. But in any event, I think we have so many diverse business models that are available to authors. There isn't any one path, and that does increase maybe the decision making and the complexity, but I find it exciting rather than draining. And I try to help people manage those choices and find the path that works for them.
So thank you for that. And I'll add, for those of you watching this that are not aware of Jane, I'm delighted to make the introduction. But what I'll say, and at the risk of belaboring the point, which frankly I'm happy to do, is that Jane calls it straight. Is not one of these rah rah, industry cheerleaders. Tells you the reality, but has this unflinching optimism and I think adaptability, which she and I have talked about a lot in the past on some podcasts. This notion of, you can't be aloof, even if you want to be. And maybe 20, 30, 50 years ago, you could cultivate a life as an author where there was a certain aloofness, where you just did your writing and whatever happened, happened. But in today's world, nobody can afford to not sully their fingers. Like there has to be some element of being a part of this community and being aware. And I think what Jane's work helps struggling writers, aspiring writers to do is navigate what can be overwhelming and figure out what's important and what are some real tangible, concrete steps to maximize their chances of finding a readership. So it's invaluable service.
I'm glad you brought up the word aloof, because there are still many authors around that are aloof and actually make it kind of part of their persona, and it's part of their success to be that way. Although in some regards, their careers were made at a different time. So like Jonathan Franzen might be a classic example. I
Yes,
mean,
that's
he's
exactly
almost reviled at this point because of how tech averse he is. So every once in a while he pops up and says something mean about Twitter or social media or the current environment. So he's like this curmudgeon, and I think he kind of takes pleasure in it to some extent. Can there be, like, if there's a 20-year-old author today who wants to do that, could they do it and succeed and have that aloof stature? And maybe. I don't know, but one of the issues I think is, I think what can be confusing for people, especially if you're on the more literary end of the spectrum, where the marketing and promotion does get cast as this thing that you shouldn't, that it colors the work, or you shouldn't have to, if the work is quality, you shouldn't have to market and promote it yourself. There's that feeling that, yeah, that where art and commerce are at odds. So when Franzen or other aloof authors are saying, look at how these tools are lowering you, like how they're bringing down have to say yes, or you have to experiment, or you have to be out. um, figuring a way to be authentic to yourself or to your work, or to just, again, I'll go back to the idea of finding your own path. It's saying no to all of it early in your career just makes things so much more difficult. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox.
No, it's incredibly valuable insight, and I happen to agree. And I think one of the takeaways, from this conversation, our previous kind of ongoing dialogue, and the work that you do is, I do think that there's a real positive message, which is you're reinforcing the reality that there is no one path. And I think whether it's a young musician or athlete, business person, writer, we are, I think, congenitally inclined to think, all right, what book do I need to read to figure it out, or what path do I follow? And the reality is, especially in a changing world, which is a cliche, but who can deny we are in a definite, time of ceaseless change. There is no one path, and I find that empowering, and it should be empowering, because what works for one person might not work for another person.
Yeah.
So.
And in some ways, it's, a very much a history repeating itself. It used to be that authors would earn money not through sales of their work or not through the publisher, because publishers didn't pay to begin with. They earned through patrons or by privilege. They could afford to sit and write because they were wealthy. So I think we're now coming back to that patronage model through Patreon and Substack and all of these new tools. And it's not the right model for everyone, but I do think saying that we have to preserve the model where publishers pay the authors a living wage, trying to hold on to that tighter and tighter, I think can be counterproductive.
Yep. And I'll just add briefly that you and I have definitely talked about this, how in a lot of regards, the literary industry is in the shadow of the music industry, because the music industry, a lot of this is already shaken out, and not all of it wonderfully. And so hopefully authors can look to some of the mistakes that were made and the assumptions, and the resistance to inevitable change, and how that had a negative effect for both the disseminators of content, but also the content creators. So so in some, TLDR, buy Jane's book and get a handle on the situation, and check out her website, be informed. All right. This is also, again, I know, I think it's clear to everyone, but it's still going to be so illuminating. If you could briefly talk about how have you developed your career as it relates to all of this stuff, like looking back on your decades of experience, how would you say you developed your career?
Well, I had an advantage in that I got a publishing job right out of school. There were a lot of factors that played into that. It was a little bit of luck. It was a little bit of preparedness. It was a little bit of skill, my charm. So I got that leg up in having a traditional publishing job from the time I left college. And I stayed there. I stayed for 12 years. And for someone in their 20s to stay in one company, it doesn't happen that often, especially now where you have that kind of stability. Yep. And I didn't know, this was not pre-planned. It wasn't my strategy, but staying put and just kind of climbing the ladder of that company and getting deeper and deeper into this particular realm of expertise that I had. The company I worked for was unique in that it had a direct to consumer component, which isn't true of a lot of publishers, at least book publishers. So there were, it had book clubs, magazines, correspondence courses before online classes became a thing, and then it switched to online classes. Yep. And so you had this direct line to the people who were reading the books you produced, or the content. They would even call and ask questions. So it was just a very dynamic education, and not just publishing, but producing media, producing content, building community. And so by the time I left that company, I had a really strong idea of what it meant to build a business. I ended up leaving as publisher, and I saw the P&Ls and and the profit for lots of different parts of the business, from the magazine to the books to the online education to the subscription products and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So just having that foundation on which to build a freelance career, I mean, not many people have that, and it was really powerful. That said, I had the foresight when I was still in my corporate job to establish my own website, establish social media accounts, which I wasn't like all gung-ho about social media as a marketing tool. It was more curiosity and experimentation. This is when it was very young and new and idealistic and optimistic, like 2007, 2008.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone knew what was coming
Yeah.
for social media. It was just all very like joyous. So being an early adopter and like figuring these things out before they had to drive a business was just like the pressure was off. I was just enjoying myself. So by the time I did go full-time freelance and I left my corporate job and I left university teaching and all that, like I had the machinery and I had the way to reach the people who were going to help me pay the bills, like because they bought my books or signed up for my courses or wanted to consult with me or invited me to speak. So I went full-time freelance in 2014 using all of these tools and resources that I had been building really for, gosh, about 10 years. I think that the principle that might come out of that, and this applies to so many creative careers, author careers, is that almost no one's an overnight success.
Right.
It's a series of small steps and consistency. And I also had the benefit of a fairly stable life, and not everyone has that. I had my health, I had the ability and the time to focus on my career. I didn't have children. So there are lots of factors that played into it.
Yeah. Well, what I've always admired, I mean, of the many things, as obviously is clear, is that you combine, and I think this is true. I mean, you are a writer, so I'm not going to say as opposed to writers, but as opposed to maybe novelists that only write fiction, there are similar trend lines, which is you have to be engaged, you have to be, aware of the industry and how things are changing. But with you, I think it's really a case study of this combination of the restlessness, the curiosity, but also you've got to put the time in, and I think that can sound to younger writers like us old people, scolding from the porch. But the reality is, whether it is a career in novel writing or music, or anything, it is a combination of fortuitous circumstance, making your own luck. But it comes back to the whole thing about inspiration, right? Like, yeah, inspiration does strike, but it certainly strikes more frequently when you're already at the desk writing. So I want to celebrate the fact that you're very modest and humble as always, but your model is not one that can be duplicated, but it can be emulated. And I would encourage anyone to look and see it's a lot of hard work, but also once you've put in the time, you increase your chances of connecting and having those tools.
Yes, and especially in any creative field, I bet you would agree, like when it comes to music, any sort of art form, you really have to put in the time to practice. And so many people are looking for that short-term success or the magic bullet, or they put their first book out and they're like, where are the sales? And it's like, well, it's your first book. You need to be patient.
Yeah.
And mastery doesn't come, it doesn't come overnight, and it's a career-long process too. So especially for writers, I think so I find it amusing when people, I shouldn't say amusing because that might be insulting, but people often say, am I too old to write and get published? Is it too late? And these are people who aren't old. I don't think, like, they might be 50, they might be 60. Am I too old? I'm like, with writing, like, the beauty of it is no one's looking at you. They don't know how old you are.
Yeah.
I'm assuming in your writing, you're not stating, I am a 60-year-old woman writing. Like,
Yeah.
we can really look at the words on the page and judge their merit based on your mastery of the craft. So I offer that as encouragement to anyone who is wondering if it's too late. It's never too late. It's about whether you have the time to put into the endeavor.
Yeah. And if it's going to be your life, you have to make it your life, and it has to be more important than many other things. So there is a recurring theme there as well. All right, Jane, how would you define or explain what literary success means to you?
freedom to do the work that you want to do, or the time to do the work that you want to do. Some control, some independence. So many people look at success, and obviously in terms of sales or bestseller lists, or did you get this or that review, or prestige or status. There's a lot of status seeking that goes on in the literary community. There's so little money. What else do we have but but status and prestige?
Right. Yeah.
But I try to look at it in terms of, did I spend my day doing what I wanted? How much was I driven by necessity or other people's demands? So having my time be my own is most important to me.
And listen, I would be remiss to not also point out that, there was a significant element of risk. I remember talking to you, around the time when you were going full freelance, and you had acknowledged, as anyone would, like, there's an element of security and stability and predictability that does exist. So I certainly don't bring that up to encourage anyone to, quit your day job and follow your dream. But there is an element of risk that needs to be embraced for that freedom. So I'm hoping I'm amplifying your answer. I find that, you've always been so encouraging and empowering for how you've taken shape of your own destiny. But I think it's important to note that you were willing to take certain risks, and because you did your homework and were good at what you do, it certainly paid off. But to follow one's dream is not just a philosophical, there's a lot of practical application to how you build this life. And again, for the umpteenth time, I think you epitomize that, and it's a really good case study for just about anyone that's trying to make a way in this changing world.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Although I have to admit that when I went full-time freelance, it was a little bit of a push off the cliff, because I certainly could have stayed in my job if I had wanted to, but it would have been at tremendous psychological cost. One of those situations where you're actively not wanted, but you can't be immediately really severed.
Right.
So it's just like better to go with grace and find something else. So yeah, I remember so vividly posting on Facebook that I was going to go full-time freelance. And the range of responses was tremendous. I mean, I would say 90% on average were people saying, congratulations, or, go get them. But there were also people who had been full-time freelance or were still in full-time freelance, weren't doing well, and saying, good luck, no parachute, or you'll never have a day off again, which, is in some respects, yes, that those things can be true. But it was just interesting to see the diversity of attitudes.
Yeah. Well, once again, I'll just point out to those that aren't familiar with Jane's story. I think, again, speaking of you as a case study, another thing I really admired about you was that you had really made yourself a literary citizen, and when you built your blog, you were providing a lot of this content free, without ostensible expectation, and you in in the least cynical and calculated way, you established your brand and your credibility, so that when it came time to do things like go freelance or write a book, you had done the hard work. And I think, again, that's important to point out to aspiring writers or established writers. These things are not automatic, and you have to be seen as genuine before people are going to invest their time and money in whatever you're offering. So again, I celebrate you as really kind of the paradigm of, there are no easy ways, but there are discernible paths forward, but all of them involve integrity and patience. So yay, Jane, once again. So everything you talk about, I think this is inherently part of every answer you give. But the final question is always, what's a 1 or 2 minute exhortation for a beginning writer that's looking for advice? Again, you've already done that, but like high level. Someone's like, want to be a writer, what do I do? First question, I'll start it. Buy Jane's book, The Business of Being a Writer. What else?
Well, first I would counsel patience. patience with yourself, with the process, whatever process that may be, whether it's improving your writing, finding an agent, marketing and promoting. There are so few quick, immediate wins, in my view, in writing and publishing. It's often the accumulation of small things over time. And then one day, something incredible happens, and it's not luck. It's not even necessarily that you made it happen. It's just that everything fell into place at that specific moment, and you get this big win. And you get to enjoy those every so often, because of the hard work we've been talking about. So the patience to see that unfold is necessary. A lot of people give up too soon. It can be it's rough. Like, I don't deny how kind of depressing and frustrating and disappointing it can be, especially if you're focused on traditional publishing, the amount of rejection and brush off and how hard it is to gain traction. But, you have to give yourself time to move through all of that, both on like a skill level and also on a psychological level. A really good book for this, by the way, is The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, for dealing with those psychological issues. So the patience, and then on top of that, just the practice, continuing to practice. And when you do feel that defeated, or you have that day of defeat, or you just feel like, why am I doing this? What's the point? You try to go back to what gives you joy about it in the first place. Is it, drafting that new novel? Is it whatever it happens to be? You have to get back to that rather than focusing on the outcome, which I guess is very Buddhist advice, but that's, I think, the only way you can succeed at it.
Yeah. Well, Jane, as always, if there's always a selfish element. I love exposing you and your wisdom to the world, but I am ceaselessly illuminated and inspired. So it really is a joy, as always, to chat with you. And I'm your number one fan. I'm deeply appreciative what I've learned from you, and I thank you for taking the time from your very busy schedule to chat with us and drop some knowledge. And it's always a pleasure to welcome you into the 1455 fold. So as always, consider yourself a welcome guest, and let us know how we can continue to celebrate and promote you. But stay well, keep inspiring us, and we'll look forward to checking in with you and seeing what you're up to as 2021 unfolds.
Thank you, Sean. It's always a joy to talk with you.
Yay. All right. Well, we will talk to you soon. And folks, if you're checking us out, just remember, we are delighted at 1455 to present this content. By design, all of our content is free. That doesn't mean it's free to put on. So if you're interested in getting involved or helping support us, check us out at 1455litarts.org and drop me a line and let me know. And we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Peace.